Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN Weekly for Saturday, August 29th, 2020. And our top story today, back to school decision-making for parents. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Mari Backman. She's a personal finance reporter with The Motley Fool. Mari, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, normally when you and I speak, we talk about personal finance, but I thought today we'd do something a little bit different. And I think it does have a personal finance angle, but I want to get your perspective on sending your children back to school, because you're a mom and you and your husband have made decisions around going back to school. So why don't you break it down for us? What are some of your decisions? What are some of the key decision points here?
Jeff, I want to start by saying that a lot of parents, most parents who have school-aged children are pretty miserable right now, and it's definitely a hard situation to navigate. So, I want to start by saying that everyone's situation is going to be unique because some school districts are only opening for virtual learning and others are allowing children in 5 days a week. So, when people go about the process of making these decisions, they're obviously going to be keeping their personal circumstances in mind. Here's what my options look like. My options look like this. I can either keep my kids home for full remote learning, or I can send my twin kindergartners to school starting in September for 2 half days a week. The rest of their learning, so the bulk of their learning would be done virtually. And then I can maybe, we're still not sure, maybe send my third grader to school for in-person learning 2 half days a week starting in early October, if that's allowed. And then the bulk of his learning would still be done remotely. So my options are basically just keep them home full time or send 2/3 of my kids in September and then maybe the last child in October. It's a little complicated, and I'm not the only parent in this kind of complicated situation. So Jeff, what I've opted to do, what works best for my family is just keeping all of my children home to do full remote learning, at least for the first marking period, which is through November. After that, they'll let us reassess, and we will reassess, and we'll see what the situation is. But that's what we're doing so far.
And, you mentioned that a lot of parents are in this situation. This is clearly a challenging time for parents who are working. This has an impact on productivity, Mari. That's why I think that there is a personal finance perspective to this, because many parents have to work, they have to earn a living. Having your children home and having to manage that and help them learn, it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It really is. And part of the reason I'm able to accept this sort of arrangement with a little bit more ease than maybe the average person is that my work schedule is fairly flexible. I work from home all the time, not just during the pandemic. I work from home full time. I do cover certain news items that need to be addressed sooner rather than later in a given day, but a lot of the writing that I do is flexible enough that if I submit a story at 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. instead of maybe during the traditional workday, it's still okay. And I have a spouse who's working remotely full time for the foreseeable future as well. So in that regard, that makes us lucky. What makes us a little bit unlucky is that I'm self-employed. So if I'm not able to work as much and my productivity declines, I don't get paid as much. A lot of other people I know are in a situation where they too wonder how they're going to juggle it all. But ultimately, if they have some weeks or they have some days where, their output isn't that great, well, their paycheck will still be the same. But I'm still not complaining because you know what? I have it a lot easier than a lot of people I know who have to physically report to work, whether they're teachers or just other people who can't do their jobs remotely any longer. And these people that I know are really struggling because now they've got 2 half days a week of school at most, and they're scrambling to find childcare. And for some people, that means, having a babysitter they've never met before come to the house. And for others, it means sending them to these pop-up learning centers. And all of these options, Jeff, they're really expensive. And my personal opinion is that they're even a little bit questionable from a safety standpoint. Right now we're in a pandemic. The whole reason they're not letting kids back to school full time is to, scatter classrooms, make sure desks can be, placed certain number of feet apart and whatnot. And they just can't bring back all the kids full time. I get that. The problem is now, a lot of parents would normally send their kids to school 5 days a week and use before or aftercare through school to kind of, close out the workday. And now that that's off the table, you've got parents just sending their kids all over the place or bringing all kinds of people into their homes. So there's more points of contact, it's more money. It's a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, and this isn't, you live in New Jersey, we both live in New Jersey, so this
Yeah.
is not unique to New Jersey. It's every school district in every state, there could be different sets of rules for different families. So it's going to be different where you live, based on where you live.
Exactly. I mean, I know that in New Jersey, I want to say there's like 500 some odd districts, which is actually, when you think about the physical size of New Jersey, that's a little bit insane. But yeah, I have friends who live in neighboring towns and neighboring districts, and their reopening plan looks different. Some are not able to send their children in at all. Others are allowed to send their kids in, for a lot more in-person learning than we are here in my town. So, yeah, so that's, and that's another challenge too, because, you know, when you're dealing with employers, right? Employers, I think, for the most part, have been somewhat flexible and understanding, if not very flexible and
Yeah.
understanding throughout this whole ordeal. But now we're sort of reaching this tricky point, right, where things are starting to reopen. At least in the Northeast, thankfully, transmission rates have declined. So things are starting to reopen. People are starting to get called back into offices. And you've got this situation now where people want to go back to work, but they can't necessarily do that. And you also have so much inconsistency, so that you might have a person who, let's say, works in an office 30 minutes from home. You might have a person who's not the only worker in that office with school-aged children, but it could be that other people with children in that office have a much better back to school arrangement as far as childcare is concerned, so that that person's employer might then look at that person and say, well, wait, Bob and Sue and James are coming in more than you are, and they also have young kids. What gives? And it's like, then you've got to get into the whole explanation of how every district is different, and it's tricky. It's pretty
Yeah.
tricky.
And what about the children themselves? I mean, you have two kindergartners and an older child. How are they in going through this? I mean, we've been talking on the podcast and on the program, you and I and others, about dealing with that. But how are they reacting to possibly doing virtual learning versus going back and seeing their friends?
Well, it's a tough situation. So I have two younger ones going into kindergarten, and trust me, those little girls wanted nothing more than to go to big kid school with their older brother. They've been looking forward to it. So it's a definite disappointment that they're going to, at the very least, be starting this school year out remotely. My son is a little bit more okay with it. He's going into third grade. And when I explained to him that school will now entail 2 half days a week, full-time masks, sitting apart from everyone, no lunch, no recess, no reading groups, no groups, or at least not no proximal groups. Like you have these reading groups, you might have them across the room from each other, but normally they'd gather kids at tables and they would read together and collaborate, and that's fun. And when I explained all that to my son, his response, and I actually posed the question to him. I said, because I believe in collaborating on these decisions to an extent. And I said to him, what do you think? What do you think about going back versus just learning from home? And he said, Mom, are you kidding me? 2 half days, fully masked, no recess. He's like, that's not even worth it. I'll just stay home. So, so that's where we're at. And thankfully, he took it in stride, and even my younger ones, they're disappointed, but they're still excited to get to meet a new teacher and whatnot. So it hasn't been that bad in my household, all things considered. But I will say this, I think the attitude that you present as a parent in these situations is really important, because if you as a parent have this positive attitude, that'll, translate to what your kids think. Whereas if you kind of tell your kids, darn it, all remote, or, now we're stuck remote for most of the week and this stinks, blah, 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 your kids are going to obviously pick up on that negativity, and they're going to take that negative approach to the situation too.
Yeah, well, a positive attitude will lead to better outcomes. And I think I've seen that on a few employer signs walking in to drop off, like, things and do business. Mari, really interesting story, amazing story. Thanks for sharing a little bit of insight into your family decision making. We appreciate you coming on the program to do that, and look forward to having you back to talk about more personal finance very soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mari. Great to see you. Thanks for sharing your perspective. And when we come back, we'll take a look at some of our best segments for the week. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
If you were like 58% of Americans, you didn't go to college. Or you did, but never finished. Maybe it's the thought of a big, intimidating campus. At Independence University, all classes are held online. Maybe it's the thought of being alone in a sea of students. At Independence U, you'll get a personal support team to help you every step of the way. Maybe it's the cost of all those books and supplies. Online means no books to buy. We even give you a new laptop and tablet to keep when you graduate. Maybe your life doesn't fit typical college classes. At Independence U, our online college fits your schedule. Let's meet a few students.
Independence University held my hand through the process.
Don't be afraid to take the leap because it has changed my life drastically.
Just take the first step and you can do it. If I did it, you can do it too.
At IU, there's no barriers to your degree.
800-535-9916.
Welcome back. On Wednesday, I sat down with the Federal Thrift Investment Board's Ravindra Deo to discuss plans for the plan in 2020 and 2021. Let's take a look.
Over the past, I think, 5 years in particular, but since the inception of the TSP, we have always asked ourselves the question, what do our participants need? What do our participants want? We recently went through a big survey, and that survey will feed our long-term plans. But for the short term, here's some of the things that we are working on. So I mentioned that we launched the 5-year L funds. I mentioned that we did a large mainframe and data center upgrade, all with the intention of helping our participants, helping provide services to our participants better, quicker, faster. Some of the things that we're doing now is with a long-term view to improving our participant outcomes. So we are getting ready to switch participants from a 3% auto-enrollment, with which they get a 1% automatic agency contribution and a 3% match. So in other words, they put in 3 and they get 4 for a total of 7, to a default of 5% where they would get a full 5%. And the advantage of that right now is that we have about roughly 77% of our participants who get the full match. And that seems like a great statistic, and it is. But that means about 23% of our participants aren't getting the full match, which means they're leaving money on the table. And we'd like to get that number closer to 100%. And so starting October 1st, when you join federal service, whether it's as a civilian employee in commerce or state or any of the agencies, or whether it's a uniformed service member serving in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, you will start getting a 5% match on your 5% contribution. And we think that ultimately will lead to a better retirement outcome because you'll have 40% more money, everything else being equal, at retirement. Nobody ever said 40% more money in retirement was a bad thing.
No.
The second thing we're doing is administrative ease. So starting January 1st of 2021, currently the way you make a catch-up contribution is you have to specify two different numbers. You have to say, one, here's my regular contribution, and you have to try and get that up to the IRS maximum. And then second, here's the catch-up contribution. And people can make relatively simple arithmetic mistakes in either this pile or this pile that causes them to mess up. Starting January 1st, you'll just have to specify one number. And if the number is bigger than the IRS maximum, the rest will automatically spill over into catch-up. And that's the way that it is easier for participants. It makes it less aggravating, less complicated. They understand it because that's the way most other plans work, and it'll make things easier for participants. And finally, one of the big changes that we're working on is consolidating a number of contracts. We currently have contracts for contact centers, we have contracts for print mail services, we have contracts for special processing and death benefits, all the things a plan does. And then we integrate all of those, and we are redoing the procurement to have all of those integrated into one procurement that we are calling RKSA. And we think it's going to have great benefits to the participants, both in terms of simplicity and ease of use, but also in terms of new features. We're going to launch a mutual fund window with the new procurement. We're going to launch a mobile app, that'll allow you to transact, look up accounts on the phone. We have one now. You can actually look at the TSP website on the phone, but it's not the same thing as a dedicated app. And our participants, particularly our younger uniformed services participants, have asked us for that, and we're excited about being able to offer it to them. So I think we do both. We look both internally and externally. So what that means to us is we look at what plans across the United States are doing. Competition is a wonderful thing. Our system of free market capitalism has worked so well. And because of competition, plans and plan providers are constantly trying to make changes. And we look and see whether those changes would make sense for our participants. And the second thing we do is we look, and that to us is external. And then we look internally. We conduct surveys with our participants. We just finished a large survey that we conduct every couple of years, where we ask our participants, hey, what would help you? What would make the TSP easier for you to use? What features do you think you would like? And we take the sum of what plans across the United States are doing and what our participants are telling us. And we use both of those to generate ideas. Sometimes they're things that we do require congressional action on. So for instance, our participants have asked us for a long time, hey, give us more flexibility in withdrawals. And that is something that Congress laid out when they created the TSP. We went to Congress, we laid out the rationale. Congress said, yep, we agree. They gave us a number of flexibilities, and we implemented those flexibilities late last year. It was a project. But we were delighted to do it, and I think it was a combination both of seeing what other plans across the United States offered and seeing what our participants wanted. And ultimately, that's what drives us.
And on Monday, I talked higher education with Inside Higher Ed's Rick Seltzer. Let's take a look.
We actually have had a few who have already moved to reopen in-person instruction because they bumped up their traditional schedules. So, we all think end of August, time to go back, maybe third week in August, fourth week in August, students are back on campus. No, a couple of places, couple outliers have already welcomed students back as early as the beginning of August. Now, typically what was happening there, and it's hard to generalize because they all had kind of disparate plans this year. But what was happening was they would bring students back in kind of a staggered move-in. And by students, I mean undergraduate students. A lot of these places have had graduate students and researchers on campus all summer because they never really shut down key projects there. But the undergraduates have been moving in now since early August in a couple of campuses. and they would stagger the times. So you would see like a week-long move-in, where before maybe these campuses would be doing it in a matter of days. So you'd have about a week of move-in, maybe a week in between, and then classes starting. And what we have seen is at least one major university, UNC Chapel Hill, had to call off in-person classes after only a week of holding them because they were getting very large numbers and very large growth in the numbers of positive coronavirus or COVID-19 tests. The students there moved in August 3rd. Like I said, that process lasted about a week, and they pulled the plug on in-person classes for undergraduates and actually said they're going to start sending undergraduates home as of Monday, August 17th. So just 2 weeks later. You were looking at between August 10th and August 16th, that campus tested almost 1,000 students for the virus, about 130 tested positive. They were reporting a positivity rate of 13.6%. Now, I don't know that there's a hard set number for campuses, but the World Health Organization tells countries and states, don't start easing your restrictions until you're at a 5% positivity rate or below that. So you're talking almost 3 times or well over 2 times that rate, and it was growing on campus. The other thing that seems to have contributed to them making that decision is they had 177 students in isolation, 349 in quarantine, and reportedly had used up all of the rooms that they had set aside for quarantining students. They had about 4 left when they made the call. And so you were looking at some clusters of cases. They were all said to be connected to either dormitories or Greek housing. The university put that out probably to assure professors that no, this wasn't spreading in your classrooms. And most universities that I've seen have been spacing out desks, talking about ventilation. I'm not really clear on how many places actually have done real infrastructure upgrades to ventilation that would maybe be the best mitigation that I've heard from some medical professionals, but that's again across the board. I don't know the situation there exactly at UNC. Anyway, I think that the point of whether it's spreading in classrooms is very important for
Sure.
Tories, though, is more important because just like whether it's the Diamond Princess or any cruise ship, again and again, this virus has shown us it spreads in contained living spaces. And we're seeing big questions at colleges and universities about whether they have figured out how to encourage students, shall we say, to have good behaviors that do not encourage the spread of virus, or even if good behaviors in certain dormitories matter, right? Like there are some videos of various parties in dorms, and obviously that is going to be a potential super spreader event. But you know, if I go back to my 4-person suite and I take my mask off, is that enough? You know, if I have a study buddy over and we work in close concert without our masks for an hour, is that enough? The modeling I've seen out there isn't great on this stuff yet. So, you know, it's big questions. This Chapel Hill situation really is kind of a whiplash for students, parents, faculty. And I think it raises the question of, was it worth it, right? Was it worth the risk? I can't answer that, but I do think that's something we're going to see picked apart over the next weeks, and probably as other campuses run into similar situations. And basically, we back in June, a bunch of reporters at Inside Higher Ed, so all the credit to the whole team. We did some public information requests, just seeking more information on the decision-making processes, because a lot of these campuses seem to be moving, and they are putting out strong statements. We will be open for in-person instruction. We will find a plan that works. And ultimately, that raises the question, well, okay, so what information are you considering? So we sought a number of documents, but one of the ones that I thought would be most interesting and most important was modeling that administrators use, asking what infection rates can we expect, what fatalities can we expect if certain things happen. And we had to do a relatively small slice of the world, actually a very small slice of the world, but we tried to focus on large public research universities, threw in a couple other types of institution too, just for the diversity of understanding. But I was actually very disappointed in what we got back from most places. We only got back one hit that said administrators used any type of mathematical modeling to make their decisions about whether to reopen in the fall. Now, it's possible we had a bad request, or possible they're kind of playing things a little bit so they don't have to release bad numbers. I don't know. But
Sure.
what we got back, I thought was really important. And it was Georgia Tech, to their credit, released a document that a professor had presented to a reopening committee. And it basically said, if we have an unmitigated scenario, so if we don't put in place any social distancing, any mask wearing, and 50% of campus gets infected, what can we expect to happen? And the eyebrow-raising number there is, you can expect about 75 people to die on that campus. And that's not a huge number at a campus with enrollment of 27,000, but you know what? One death is a huge number for a significant portion of people, including the person who dies.
Unless you're one of the 75.
Exactly.
Then it's 100. Then it's 100%.
That's not
a
right.
good number.
That's exactly right. And so I think one thing that's really important here is college and university administrators have been very reluctant. I don't know how many, if any, I've heard talk about death or student death. The talking point has been, it does not affect students at very high rates. And this projection said you can expect 10 students to die, 30 staff members, 25 or so faculty members, and 10 contractors or others with access to campus. And I think it's really important to see those real numbers, because just like you said, it's not a big number until you're the person that it affects.
Yeah.
So
the family member of the person who was impacted. I mean, it has its impact.
Exactly.
Regardless of numbers.
Yes, regardless of the numbers. And so you have that human toll. I mean, you also, though, this study was very important, I think, in that it talked about the potential for long-term ramifications of the infection, even if you don't die. Because we don't really know exactly how long it lasts, what kind of heart inflammation young people could have, what kind of circulatory problems. There are reports of all those things. And it's hard to make decisions without information on those things, or it's hard to make decisions until those things have been elevated to your attention.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN Weekly. We're back again tomorrow on the BRN Sunday podcast, where I'm joined by members of the media, academia, financial services, as we analyze the news this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more. You're not going to want to miss the show. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.